Hey everybody, welcome to Level Pixel Level, and this is just the third video in my Eyelid series. This video we're just going to review how to do a blink using action constraints. So here you can see this blink here, and I'm just going to show you today how to build this. It's a pretty easy setup once you get into it, and I really like this technique for making a nice blink, but let's get right to it. Okay, so download the files from Gumroad if you want to follow along. The first thing I'm going to do is add a new rig, and I'm just going to put this in world space. And just lift it up to here. I'm just going to rename this to root, and I'll just scale it down. This rig is a little bit different than the last one. Let me just grab the face and turn on wireframe. Essentially what we want to do is put a control or a bone on every single vertex. So here, 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 and we'll go 4 up here. And then what we want to do is weight paint that 100% to each of these bones. So to actually place these and weight paint these does not take too long. And then we're going to make an animation for the eyelid. And then we're going to drive that animation with another bone. So first thing we need to do is place the bones. So click on the armature. Make sure you're in edit mode. And just do Shift D and just push this bone over here. Doesn't really matter where in space it is right now. We're just going to place it first and then rename it. So I'm going to rename it to eyelid deform.left.001. I'll just duplicate this over and I'll just rename this to right.001. So now if I have my x-axis mirror turned on, I can mirror these. I'll just scale this down a little bit and just move it in. So I'm going to turn on snap as well and make sure that you have vertex turned on. I'm just going to snap this bone right to one of these points right here. You'll see that I have 3 edges here. That's to hold the eyelid shape when sub D is turned on. It doesn't really matter where it snaps to as long as it snaps to one of those. Now, I'm going to go to X-ray mode, and if I do Shift D, I can move this and snap it to here. What I noticed though is it's a little hard to see what's going on with these bones, so I'm going to change the display mode to stick. I find that makes it a little bit easier to see them, and I can even scale these down even more. Then I'll grab this one, I'll hit Shift D, and since I have snap turned on, I can just snap right to that point there. And Shift D and snap to that point. So now very quickly I can just move along and I'm just hitting Shift D and snapping to these points. It's pretty quick when you get into it, and again, because we have X mirror turned on, I'm doing the left and the right at the same time. So this is the easy part. It's really quick to do this. This is where naming might come in. You might want a bit of a different name to snap to these points. And I'm just about done the top eyelid. I'm not going to do the corners here, just the top eyelid and the bottom eyelid. So I'll duplicate this over and I'll push it here, and I'm just duplicating these out just for those first couple rings there. Again, I have snap turned on, so it's very easy to get to those vertex points and just match that area up. So still just going along, snapping these points here. And I'm just about done the lower eyelid. This is sort of a quick process. You may want to do a couple more loops here as well, depending on how detailed you want to build this eye. Okay, that's ready to go. Next step is to weight paint it. So I'll go to object mode. I'll click on the face and I'll shift click on the rig. I'll do Control P, and I'm going to do with empty groups. So now if I click on the face, I have all of these eyelid groups here ready to go. The first thing I'm going to do is just flood this to the root. I did this in the other video as well with that other eye rig, so I'll go to edit mode. I'll select everything. I'll select on the root vertex group and I'll just click assign. If I flip to weight paint mode, you can see that I've flooded that 100% and that these are at 0. Remember, red is 100%, blue is 0%. Now the weight painting here is really easy. Essentially, I just want to go along and weight paint each vertex 100% to that bone that we built. So I'm just going to click on the eyes and I'm just going to turn off select just so I don't accidentally select the eyes as I weight paint. I'm going to click on the armature. I'm going to shift click on the face. I just did that in the outliner. You could do it in viewport as well. And I'm going to go to weight paint mode. Now the weight painting here is very simple. I'm just going to select on this bone here, go to the tools, make sure that auto normalize is turned on, and make sure that X mirror is turned on under options. Now I'm just weight painting that 100% to that bone right there. Actually, I'll do this one right here as well. Then I'll control click on this bone and I'm weight painting 100% just to each of these bones. It is a very easy weight paint. This is probably one of the easier parts of this process. Again, each vert is basically just getting 100% to each bone. It is a technique in face rigging where you actually give each vertex its own joint or its own bone. And it's almost to overcome the issue with shape keys in Blender, where you're actually creating a bone rig to act as shape keys. I prefer it sometimes. Sometimes I don't though. It really depends on what I'm working on. I just want to get that in there as well. And I'll probably just speed up the video here just as I go along and weight paint these pieces, just because it's a pretty repetitive process. Again, I'm just clicking a bone and just weight painting over. Doesn't take too long. The longest part of this process will probably be the action constraint, which isn't too bad. It's not a bad technique if you want to try it. I'm usually at a mix between this one and the fan type. Almost the fan type I like a little bit better just because of the way that it can be added to. This one can be a little bit constraining, but depending on the type of show you're working on, it can work really well. Okay, that's ready to go, and I can test out some of these pieces now. So I'll exit weight paint mode, and I'll click on my rig, and I'll just go to pose mode. Just go back to shaded, and I'll just move some of these pieces. Make sure you turn snap off as well. And I'll just turn off X-ray as well. Cool, so now I have an eyelid. Now I'm going to start actually animating this to sort of build my shape keys. So I'm going to do one thing actually before I start, and that's I'm going to turn on subdivision. And again, always make sure the subdivision is below the armature. You want it to calculate after the armature because it's just there to sort of clean up the shape. If the subdivision calculates before the armature, it's going to slow down your character. So go to pose mode, select on your rig, and go to frame 0. And you're just going to select everything actually. And you're just going to hit I, and that's to insert a keyframe on location, rotation, scale. Then I'm going to come to frame 20, and I'm going to turn on auto key. This means that as I change the bones, it's automatically going to add a keyframe here. And I made a little mistake. I just want to make sure that my rotation is not in quaternion. I want it to be in Euler, so I'll go back to frame 0. I'll select everything, and I'll do Control R, XYZ Euler. That's going to remove my keyframe though. I need to actually hit I to add a location, rotation, scale again. Now I'll go to frame 20. I have my auto key set on, and I'm just going to make the eyelid shape. So I'm just pulling down these pieces here. I could enter X-ray mode as well, and then I'll just pull these pieces forward as well. This process doesn't take too long. You're just looking for a nice linear shape across that eye with the supporting rows of vertices as well. So the blink shape itself doesn't take too long. It's more the refining of the shape and cleaning it up. So I'm getting there with this. It's almost done. What I'll do is I'll probably just select on the mesh and go to X-ray mode, then select on the rig again and go to pose mode. Just so I can see that blink from this view. I'm just really trying to get a nice even line across that eye. It's coming together all right now. And I'm just posing these bones into a position. That's getting there. I'll probably just flip back to object mode to turn off wireframe. Flip back to my rig and then just pull these pieces forward. I should have named these a little bit better just so I know what's at the top and what's at the bottom. But just for this example, I can just go through and sort of place these pieces. And you want the top eyelid to go on top of the bottom eyelid for this. just so you get a really nice clean shape to it. We're just about done here with this first part, just sort of cleaning up this shape and just making it look really nice. Right about there is looking fairly nice. What I want to do though is these supporting edges here, I also want to drag them down. Just so that they're sort of pulling that lash or that eyelid down with it. These don't take very long to place, you're just sort of eyeballing where you want them to be and following the curvature of the eye. And I'm just sort of bringing those supporting edges down on that second row just to give it a really nice shape. So now something like this, I can even check out the blink animation, just see how it's doing. And again, what we're sort of doing is making a shape key using a rig. It's probably not as complicated as the fan type rig, but it's a little bit more constraining. That being said though, it's almost more useful to an animator than a shape key based method. With a shape key based method, you're kind of limited to the mesh. This method, once you have it down and you have things working, you could even transfer it to other characters. So it becomes a usable rig in a couple situations. So let's check this out. I'll just turn off my rig and I just want to clean up that eyelid shape a little bit. I'm just not really liking a couple of these pieces here. And I'm just going to turn my viewport preview to 2 just so I can see what it's going to look like when it's going to be rendered as well. And I'm just making sure that it's not going into the eye, that's all. So it's a lot of finessing, a lot of playing just to get a really nice shape. I prefer to spend a bit more time getting a really nice shape so that the animator doesn't have to mess with it that much. I'd rather them have a really nice shape while I might have to spend a bit more time. It's less time for them. And let's check that out. It's getting there. Still a little bit of a hiccup right here that I want to fix. I just don't like the way that that's sort of flowing there. I don't like the line that it's creating. And it might be because these are just a bit too close together. I'll bring that in too. Sometimes I'll just collide it with the eye just to know where the eye is and then just pull back a little bit. And I'll just lift it up just a little bit just to overlap that eyelid. Let's check that out. It's looking nice. Okay, let's move on though, just to get the last part of this down. So what you want to do is copy all these pieces here to the other side. And you can do this with, well, I'll do it manually with the buttons. If I go to pose, I can copy the pose, and I'm going to go pose, paste, pose, flipped. And that'll paste it to the other side. And since I have auto key turned on, it's going to automatically key all of those pieces. So now I have this. Okay, so let's actually add this to an action constraint. So drag up your timeline here. And I'm actually just going to drag this window down and I'm going to change it to a dope sheet. The reason I want to change it to a dope sheet is because I want to actually remove the action from these eyes. We're going to put it back in later. So I'm going to go to, instead of dope sheet, I'm going to change it to action editor. Here is this action. If I select everything, here's the actual keys that we're going to use in our action constraint. So I'm just going to rename this to eye blink. And let's actually remove it. So now there is no animation on the eye. That's sort of what I want. I need to add some controls though. So I'm going to select on the root bone that I added here. I'm going to do Shift D. Just going to drag it to the front, scale it down and just rename it. Eyelid top dot left dot 001. I'm going to move it over to here and I'll just duplicate it over and name it dot right. Again, since I have X mirror turned on, I can now move them together, and I can just duplicate it down, and I'll just rename these to bottom. It's going to help out later when we're trying to find the names of these bones in our constraint. Okay, so an action constraint works sort of like we're going to drive the animation with the value of this bone here. So I'm going to select on just one of these bones, one of these eyelid joints here, and I'm going to go to constraints, and I'm going to add an action constraint. The target is the rig itself, the armature that we added, and the bone is eyelid top.left.001. The action is eyelid or eye blink, that action that we created earlier. So I want this to be on the Z location, and I want it to be in local space. Local space means that only when that control moves is it going to affect this constraint. World space would be like if I move the entire character, the constraint is going to drive, and I don't want that. I just want local space. Now here's where it gets interesting. The action range is 0 to 20. That means frame 0 to frame 20. That was from my actual animation that I added in earlier. For the target range right now, let's try this. Let's do min at 0, and let's put the maximum at -1. That's because I want this to drive down as this goes negative. Now, you can see it. Oh, I have a little mistake there. That's because I have auto key turned on still. So I'm going to undo this and turn auto key off. As I move this down, you can see that it is slowly moving that control. The problem is -1 is actually very far away. It's all the way down here. So I'll put it back at 0, and I'll go back to that constraint. And I'll make it -0.01. Now when I move this down, it's better. I want that fine-tuned even more. I'll do -0.05. That's looking good. Let's do it even more. Let's do -0.01. See what that looks like. Perfect. I like the way that's working right there. Actually, it even feels a little bit too rushed. Let's do 2.5 and try this out. Okay, that's feeling right there. So now you need to make this constraint for every single eye. Now I'm just kidding, you can copy this. If you have the copy attributes menu add-on turned on, I'll show you where that is. If you go edit preferences, this will ship with your Blender as well. Under add-ons, type in copy. You want to have this turned on. Interface copy attributes menu. Very useful add-on. I use it all the time. What you're going to do is select all of these joints here, and then shift select the last joint and do Control C, and you're going to do copy selected constraints. And the constraint you're going to copy is action. Then just click OK. And what that does is it copies that action constraint to all the other bones. Now, I have this to control my eyelid. So fairly simple technique for getting that eyelid to work. Let's do the bottom. I'm just going to copy this constraint again from here to here. So I'll do Control C, copy selected constraint, action. Now why I copied it to here is because all of my values are filled in. The only thing I need to change is the bone. So I'm going to do bottom. Now, since this is on the bottom here and I duplicated it down, instead of a minus, I'm just going to make it a positive. So now this control here should be moving that eyelid. Yep, that's perfect. Now what I can do is grab this control and copy it to all these. So I just do a border selector on all these bones, and I shift click on that bone last. Then I do Control C, copy selected constraints, action, and click OK. Now this one moves up, drives that action. And when this moves down, it drives this action. So I can do the same to the other side. I can just click on this control here, shift click on this control, do Control C, selected constraints, action, OK. This one here though, instead of top.left, I want top.right. Again, then I can just do a border select over all of these, make sure I have this one selected last, do Control C, copy selected constraints, action. And I'll just do the bottom one here. So I'll shift click on this, do Control C, copy select constraint action, and I'll just make it bottom right. And I just want to make it a positive value instead of a minus range down here. Select all these, shift click on this one, do Control C, copy selected constraints, action. So that is the basic technique for this eyelid shape. You can keep playing with this and add more keys to the action to get even more shapes. Why I actually like this one is that as I'm actually animating this, or if I give this to an animator, action constraints are great for leaving the bones free. And I'll show you what I mean. Say I drag this down, but you want to get a bit of a different shape. I can still come in here and key this and shape the eye. And now I have a really interesting shape on that eye. Let me turn off wireframe. So now I have an interesting shape on that eye while maintaining my blink. And that's sort of what you want to give the animation team, is the ability to play with these controls to get really interesting shapes. So it's almost like a rig-driven shape key, but with more options to give more emotion to the character. So I've shown you pretty much 3 different ways to rig a blink in Blender. I've used all 3 on different shows, on different characters. It really depends on what is needed from that character. If I need a really nice clean blink with a bit of expression, I'll use this. If I need something that needs a lot of changes, I'll use the fan method. And if it's just a background character, I'll use a shape key. Or if it's a really short show where they just need to blink, I'll use a shape key as well. So none of these methods are necessarily right or wrong. It just depends on what your show and what your shot and what your character requires. Anyway, let me know if you have any questions in the comments below, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.